Welcome to the Buddhism Podcast. Today we're exploring one of the most profound yet practical teachings in all of Buddhist wisdom, impermanence, and how understanding this fundamental truth can transform our relationship with change from something we fear into something we can actually embrace. I learned about impermanence the hard way during what I now call my year of everything falling apart. Within 12 months, I lost my job of 8 years. My long-term relationship ended. My father was diagnosed with a serious illness, and I had to move out of the apartment I'd called home for nearly a decade. At the time, it felt like my entire life was dissolving around me, and I was desperately trying to hold on to pieces of a puzzle that kept slipping through my fingers. That's when a wise meditation teacher gently pointed out something that changed my perspective entirely. "Nothing has actually gone wrong," she said. "Everything is simply doing what everything always does, changing. The question is whether you'll fight against this natural flow or learn to dance with it." Her words opened a door to understanding that has made all the difference in how I navigate life's inevitable transitions. If you're anything like most people I know, you probably have a love-hate relationship with change. We want the good changes, promotions, falling in love, improved health, but we resist the difficult ones: loss, aging, economic uncertainty. We live in a culture that promises stability and permanence. Forever homes, lifetime warranties, until death do us part. Yet our daily experience tells a different story. Your bodies age, relationships evolve, technology transforms our world at dizzying speeds, and even our thoughts and emotions constantly shift. The statistics on modern anxiety tell a sobering story about our relationship with change. Over 40% of adults report feeling more anxious about the future than they did 5 years ago, with fear of change ranking as one of the top 3 anxiety triggers. We're living through what sociologists call the age of acceleration, where the pace of change in technology, climate, and society outstrips our psychological capacity to adapt. Yet here's what the Buddha discovered 600 years ago that modern psychology is just beginning to understand. Much of our suffering doesn't come from change itself, but from our resistance to change. When we align ourselves with the fundamental truth of impermanence, when we stop fighting against the nature of reality, something remarkable happens. Instead of feeling like victims of change, we begin to find freedom within it. Today, I'll share how the Buddhist understanding of anicca impermanence offers not just philosophical insight, but practical wisdom for navigating everything from relationship changes and career transitions to aging, loss, and the rapid pace of modern life. We'll explore how accepting impermanence can actually make us more resilient, more present, and paradoxically, more able to enjoy the good times because we're not spending energy trying to make them permanent. This isn't about becoming fatalistic or passive. It's not about giving up on planning or caring about outcomes. Instead, it's about discovering a different way of engaging with life, one that allows us to work wholeheartedly toward our goals while holding lightly to specific results, to love deeply while accepting that all relationships change, to care for our health while recognizing that our bodies are temporary vehicles. What I find most beautiful about the teaching on impermanence is that it's simultaneously the most obvious and the most forgotten truth of human existence. Of course, everything changes. We see it everywhere, every day. Yet somehow we continue to be surprised by change, to resist it, to try to create permanence in a fundamentally impermanent world. Today's exploration is an invitation to stop fighting reality and discover the peace that comes from swimming with the current of change, rather than exhausting ourselves swimming against it. Whether you're facing a major life transition right now, dealing with the anxiety of uncertainty, or simply wanting to find more peace in our rapidly changing world, the wisdom of impermanence offers a pathway to greater freedom and resilience. Let's begin by understanding what the Buddha actually meant by impermanence and why he considered it one of the 3 fundamental characteristics of all existence. To truly appreciate how revolutionary the Buddhist understanding of impermanence can be for our modern lives, we need to understand what the Buddha actually taught about this fundamental aspect of reality. Impermanence isn't just one teaching among many. In Buddhism, it's one of what are called the 3 marks of existence, the 3 characteristics that define all conditioned reality: impermanence, suffering, and non-self. The Buddha taught that everything in existence falls into 2 categories: conditioned and unconditioned phenomena. Conditioned phenomena are things that arise due to causes and conditions, so essentially everything we experience in daily life, from our thoughts and emotions to our relationships, our bodies, the weather, and even massive geological formations. Unconditioned phenomena like the awareness that observes all these changes remain constant. But everything else? It's in constant flux. What makes the Buddhist understanding so profound is that impermanence operates on multiple levels simultaneously. There's what we might call gross impermanence, the obvious changes we can easily see. People age, seasons change, technologies become obsolete, relationships begin and end. These changes are undeniable, even if we don't always like them. But then there's subtle impermanence, which is far more radical and liberating to understand. This is the teaching that everything is changing moment to moment, even when it appears stable. Your body is completely replacing its cells regularly. You're literally not the same physical person you were 7 years ago. Your thoughts and emotions are arising and passing away constantly, like clouds forming and dissolving in the sky of awareness. Even seemingly solid objects like mountains are in constant flux when viewed from the perspective of geology or atomic physics. Here's where it gets interesting. The Buddha taught that much of our suffering comes from denying or resisting this fundamental law of impermanence. We want our good moods to last forever, our youth to remain, our loved ones to never change, our jobs to provide permanent security. We organize our entire lives around the fantasy that we can create islands of permanence in an ocean of change. But here's the liberating insight. When we stop fighting against impermanence and instead align ourselves with this truth, suffering actually decreases rather than increases. It's like the difference between swimming against a strong current exhausting and futile versus learning to swim with the current, which can actually become effortless and even joyful. Modern physics offers a fascinating parallel to ancient Buddhist wisdom. Quantum mechanics reveals that at the subatomic level, everything is in constant motion and flux. What appears solid and permanent, this chair, this table, even our own body is actually mostly empty space with particles dancing in patterns of energy. The Buddhist sage and the quantum physicist are pointing toward the same truth. Permanence is an illusion created by the limitations of our ordinary perception. Neuroscience adds another layer of confirmation. Brain imaging shows that our sense of having a permanent, unchanging self is actually a construction created by various brain networks working together. What we call I is really a constantly changing stream of experiences, thoughts, and sensations that our minds weave into a story of continuity. Understanding this isn't depressing, it's incredibly freeing, because it means we're not stuck with any particular version of ourselves. Now, you might be thinking, if everything is impermanent, why should I care about anything? Why make plans, form relationships, or work toward goals? This is a common misunderstanding of impermanence teaching. The Buddha wasn't advocating nihilism or apathy. Instead, he was pointing toward a more skillful way of engaging with life. When we truly understand impermanence, we can love more fully because we're not wasting energy trying to prevent the inevitable changes in our relationships. We can work more wholeheartedly because we're not paralyzed by the fear of failure or obsessed with permanent success. We can enjoy pleasurable experiences more completely because we're not desperately trying to make them last forever. Think about how you experience a beautiful sunset. You don't try to stop the sun from setting. That would be absurd and impossible. Instead, you appreciate the beauty precisely because you know it's temporary. The same principle applies to every aspect of life when we truly embrace impermanence. There's a famous Zen saying, "You are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement." This captures the beautiful paradox of impermanence perfectly. You can accept yourself completely as you are right now, while simultaneously embracing the fact that you're constantly changing and growing. You can love your partner exactly as they are today, while recognizing that both of you will continue evolving throughout your relationship. The Buddhist teaching on impermanence isn't meant to make us detached or uncaring. Rather, it's designed to help us engage more skillfully with the reality of change. When we stop trying to freeze frame our lives and instead learn to find stability within change itself, we discover a kind of freedom that doesn't depend on external circumstances remaining the same. As we move into exploring specific applications of this wisdom, remember that understanding impermanence intellectually is just the beginning. The real transformation happens when this understanding moves from our heads to our hearts, from concept to lived experience. It's in our relationships, our work, our daily encounters with loss and change that the liberating power of impermanence reveals itself. Perhaps nowhere is our resistance to impermanence more intense than in our relationships with the people we love. We fall in love and want it to last forever. We form deep friendships and expect them to remain unchanged. We become parents and somehow believe our children will always need us in the same way. Yet every relationship, no matter how profound, is constantly evolving, and eventually, through distance, growth, or death, every relationship as we know it comes to an end. This truth isn't meant to diminish the beauty of love, but to help us love more skillfully. When we understand that all relationships are temporary, we can appreciate them more deeply, rather than taking them for granted. It's like that sunset again. We don't love it less because it's brief. We love it more because we know it won't last forever. The Buddhist distinction between attachment and love becomes crucial here. Attachment says, "I love you, and you must never change, never leave, never disappoint me." Love says, "I care deeply about your well-being and happiness, and I accept that you're a constantly evolving person who may grow in directions I cannot control or predict." Attachment grasps, love holds with open hands. I remember counseling a woman whose marriage was ending after 23 years. She was devastated, not just by the divorce, but by her sense that those 23 years had somehow been wasted if they weren't going to last forever. Through exploring impermanence together, she gradually came to see those years differently, not as a failed attempt at permanence, but as a complete and meaningful chapter in her life story. The marriage had fulfilled its purpose for both of them during the time it flourished, even though that time had now ended. Grieving becomes a different process when we understand impermanence. Rather than grief being about something going wrong, it becomes the natural response to the temporary nature of all connections. This doesn't make grief less painful, but it can make it less confusing. We're not grieving because someone or something wasn't supposed to change, or inver grieving because we love something temporary, which is actually the only kind of thing there is to love. The Buddhist approach to loss includes what's called anticipatory grief, the sadness we feel when we truly contemplate the temporary nature of what we cherish. This might sound morbid, but it's actually liberating. When we acknowledge that our parents will die, our children will grow up and leave, our bodies will age, we stop taking these precious gifts for granted. We become more present with our aging parents, more engaged with our children while they're young, more grateful for our health while we have it. There's a beautiful practice in some Buddhist traditions of occasionally meditating on the fact that everyone you encounter during the day, the barista, the colleague, the stranger on the bus, will someday die. Rather than being depressing, this meditation tends to evoke tremendous tenderness and compassion. These fellow humans you're sharing this brief moment with are just as fragile and temporary as you are, just as deserving of kindness in their brief time here. What's particularly challenging in our culture is what some call spiritual materialism in relationships, the unconscious belief that if we're spiritual enough, mindful enough, or loving enough, we can somehow transcend the basic facts of impermanence. We think that if we meditate together, communicate perfectly, or love unconditionally, our relationship should be immune to change. But this is another form of resistance to impermanence, dressed up in spiritual clothing. The wisdom of impermanence actually enhances rather than diminishes our capacity for intimacy. When we know our time with someone is limited, we're more likely to choose presence over preoccupation, authentic communication over superficial pleasantries, forgiveness over grudge holding. Why waste precious time with someone you love on anything other than genuine connection? Let's take a moment for a brief reflection on this theme. Bring to mind someone you love, perhaps a family member, close friend, or partner. Allow yourself to feel the warmth of affection you have for this person. Now, gently acknowledge the truth that this relationship, as you know it today, is temporary. Your feelings may change. Their feelings may change. Circumstances may separate you, or death will eventually part you. Notice what arises, perhaps sadness, perhaps fear, perhaps a deeper appreciation. Simply observe these feelings without trying to change them. Finally, return to that sense of love and see if it feels different now, perhaps more precious, more immediate, more tender. This practice isn't meant to make you anxious about losing people you love. Instead, it's designed to help you appreciate them more fully while you have the gift of their presence in your life. As the saying goes, we don't know what we have until it's gone. But impermanence practice helps us know what we have while we still have it. Working with impermanence in relationships also means accepting that people change sometimes in ways we don't like or understand. The person you married may develop interests you don't share. Your best friend from college may grow in directions that feel foreign to you. Your children will become adults with their own values and choices. Impermanence practice helps us love people through their changes, rather than trying to freeze them in the version we first fell in love with. There's profound grief work involved in accepting that the people we love are constantly dying and being reborn, not literally, but in the sense that they're constantly changing. The friend who was so available in their 20s may become busier with family responsibilities in their 30s. The spouse who was adventurous in youth may become more homebody-oriented with age. Learning to grieve these micro losses while celebrating new aspects of people we love is part of skillful relationship. In Buddhism, there's a concept called precious human birth, the recognition that being born as a human with the capacity for consciousness, choice, and connection is extraordinarily rare and valuable. When we combine this with impermanence wisdom, every interaction becomes precious. This conversation with your teenager might be one of the last before they head off to college. This dinner with your aging parents might be one of fewer remaining than you'd prefer to count. This ordinary Tuesday evening with your partner might be part of a limited collection of such evenings you'll share together. This awareness doesn't have to be heavy or morbid. In fact, it often brings a quality of lightness and appreciation to our interactions. When we know time is limited, we're more likely to choose love over being right, presence over productivity, gratitude over complaint. Impermanence becomes not a source of sadness, but a teacher of what truly matters. Let's turn our attention to an area where impermanence often hits us hardest in modern life: our careers, achievements, and material circumstances. We live in a culture that encourages us to build our identity around what we do for work, how much we earn, what we own, and what we've accomplished. Yet, all of these things are particularly vulnerable to the winds of change. I learned this lesson viscerally when the nonprofit organization I'd worked for passionately for 8 years suddenly lost its major funding and had to close. One day, I was the program director with business cards in a corner office. The next day, I was unemployed, questioning not just what I would do next, but who I actually was without that title and role. It was simultaneously devastating and oddly liberating devastating because I'd built so much of my identity around that work, but liberating because I was forced to discover that my essential worth existed independently of any job title. The Buddha taught about wealth and status as examples of what he called the 8 worldly concerns. 4 things we typically crave: gain, pleasure, praise, and fame. And 4 things we typically fear: loss, pain, blame, and disgrace. His insight was that suffering comes not from having or not having these things, but from our attachment to them as sources of permanent security or identity. This doesn't mean the Buddha advocated poverty or recommended we stop caring about our work. Instead, he pointed toward what's called the middle way, between indulgence and deprivation, between being driven by material success and completely withdrawing from worldly engagement. We can work wholeheartedly, earn money responsibly, and even enjoy material comforts, while simultaneously understanding that none of these things provide the permanent security our minds crave. Here's a counterintuitive insight. Understanding impermanence can actually enhance rather than diminish our motivation. When we stop needing our work to provide permanent identity or security, we're free to engage with it more creatively and authentically. We can take appropriate risks because we're not desperately clinging to any particular outcome. We can pursue goals that genuinely matter to us rather than chasing external validation. Consider the difference between working from fear versus working from inspiration. Fear-based work says, I must achieve this specific outcome or I'll be worthless, insecure, unsuccessful. Inspiration-based work says, I'm drawn to contribute in this way while I have the opportunity, knowing that circumstances will inevitably change and I'll adapt accordingly. This second approach often leads to better work and certainly to greater peace of mind. When we face career transitions, whether chosen or forced impermanence, wisdom becomes invaluable. Job loss, industry changes, economic downturns, or simply growing in new directions all become more manageable when we understand that our careers were always temporary anyway. Instead of seeing these transitions as deviations from some imagined permanent path, we can recognize them as the natural rhythm of working life. I know a surgeon who had to stop practicing after developing hand tremors. Initially, he was devastated. Surgery wasn't just his career, it was his identity, his purpose, his entire sense of self-worth. Through meditation on impermanence, He gradually came to see this transition as an invitation to discover other ways of contributing. He eventually became a medical educator, finding that teaching brought him as much fulfillment as surgery had, just in a different form. The concept of right livelihood from Buddhist ethics offers guidance for navigating career impermanence. Right livelihood means work that doesn't harm others and ideally contributes to well-being, but it also means holding our work lightly enough that we can adapt when circumstances change. This might mean developing multiple income streams, continuously learning new skills, or simply maintaining enough inner flexibility to pivot when external conditions shift. Let's address the practical reality of financial insecurity that impermanence can trigger. Understanding that money and material circumstances are temporary doesn't mean being financially irresponsible. Instead, it means building resilience while accepting that no amount of savings or success can guarantee permanent security. We can plan wisely for the future while holding those plans lightly. There's a beautiful paradox here. People who truly understand the impermanence of wealth often become better at managing money, not worse. They're less likely to make desperate decisions based on fear, less likely to overspend to impress others, and more likely to find contentment with enough rather than constantly needing more. When you know that no amount of money can provide permanent security, you stop chasing the impossible and start appreciating what you have. The Buddhist teaching on contentment becomes particularly relevant to material impermanence. Contentment doesn't mean complacency or lack of ambition. Instead, it means finding a kind of baseline peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. You can work toward improving your situation while simultaneously being okay with your current situation. This inner contentment becomes your portable security, traveling with you through all the inevitable changes in your external circumstances. I want to share the story of a meditation student who embodied this beautifully. Maria built a successful restaurant over 15 years, only to lose everything during the pandemic. Instead of falling into despair, she found herself surprisingly at peace. "I realized I had been carrying the restaurant like a weight," she told me. "I love the work, but I was so attached to it continuing forever that I couldn't enjoy it fully. Losing it actually freed me to remember why I started cooking in the first place, for the joy of nourishing people." She now runs a small catering business from her home and says she's happier than when she owned the restaurant. This doesn't mean we should be passive about our careers or cavalier about financial responsibility. Understanding impermanence actually enables more skillful engagement with work and money because we're operating from wisdom rather than fear. We can pursue excellence without perfectionism, work hard without workaholism, save money without hoarding, and enjoy success without being enslaved by it. There's also profound freedom in recognizing that our professional achievements, no matter how impressive, are temporary. The Nobel Prize winner and the unemployed person are equally subject to aging, illness, and death. This isn't depressing, it's liberating. It frees us from the exhausting treadmill of constantly needing to prove our worth through external accomplishments. Let's try a brief reflection on career and material impermanence. Consider your current work situation, your job, income, professional identity, or material circumstances. Now imagine that 5 years from now, all of these external conditions have changed significantly. Perhaps you're in a different career, living in a different place, with a different income level. Notice what arises: anxiety, excitement, curiosity, resistance. Without trying to predict the future, can you find a quality of okayness with the uncertainty of not knowing what your professional life will look like years from now? This isn't about being passive, but about finding peace with the fundamental uncertainty that exists, regardless of how much we plan or try to control outcomes. The goal isn't to stop caring about work or money, but to hold them lightly enough that our well-being doesn't rise and fall with our external circumstances. When we understand that career, success, and material comfort are temporary gifts rather than permanent entitlements, we can enjoy them more fully while we have them and adapt more gracefully when they inevitably change. This middle way between attachment and withdrawal allows us to engage wholeheartedly with our working lives while maintaining the inner flexibility to navigate whatever changes come our way. And in our rapidly changing economy, this flexibility isn't just spiritual wisdom, it's practical survival skill. If there's one area where impermanence becomes undeniably personal, it's our relationship with our own bodies. Every day, we wake up in a physical form that's slightly different from the one we went to. Sleep and cells dying and being born, muscles and bones gradually changing, our energy and capacities slowly shifting. Yet many of us spend enormous amounts of mental energy trying to deny, fight, or reverse this most fundamental aspect of our humanity. The Buddha addressed bodily impermanence directly through what are called the four contemplations that every human being will face: aging, illness, death, and separation from all we hold dear. This might sound morbid to our youth-obsessed culture, but these contemplations weren't meant to depress practitioners. They were designed to wake us up to the preciousness of this temporary physical existence and free us from the suffering that comes from denying biological reality. Let's start with aging, since it's happening to all of us right now, regardless of our current age. Our culture treats aging as a failure, something to be hidden, denied, or reversed through increasingly desperate measures. But what if we approached aging as a natural, even sacred process? What if we saw the lines on our faces as maps of our laughter and concern, our changing bodies as evidence of a life fully lived? I remember the shift in my own relationship with aging when I started practicing what Buddhists call contemplation of the aging body. Instead of avoiding mirrors or being shocked by photos, I began observing the changes in my body with the same curious attention I might bring to watching a tree change through season. This wasn't about becoming resigned to deterioration, but about appreciating the incredible fact that this body has carried me through decades of experience. When we resist aging, we waste enormous energy fighting against the inevitable. When we accept aging as natural even, while taking reasonable care of our health, we free up that energy for actually living. The wisdom of impermanence doesn't mean neglecting our health or giving up on vitality. Instead, it means engaging with our physical well-being from a place of gratitude and care, rather than desperation and denial. Working with chronic illness through the lens of impermanence offers a particularly profound teaching. Illness can be one of our greatest teachers about impermanence because it forces us to confront the reality that we don't control our bodies as much as we'd like to think. Yet, within this humbling truth lies unexpected freedom. I've worked with many people facing serious illnesses who discovered that accepting their body's limitations actually opened up new possibilities for living. When you can no longer define yourself primarily through physical capabilities, you're invited to discover other sources of meaning and identity. When you can no longer take physical health for granted, you often develop a deeper appreciation for the good days and moments. A meditation student with multiple sclerosis shared this insight. MS forced me to understand impermanence in my bones. My body changes day by day, sometimes hour by hour. At first, this was terrifying, but gradually, I learned to flow with these changes instead of fighting them. I discovered that my essence, the part of me that observes all these changes, remains stable, even as everything else shifts. In some strange way, illness became my greatest teacher about what truly lasts and what doesn't. The Buddhist practice of death meditation might sound extreme to Western ears, but it's actually one of the most life-affirming practices I know. This isn't about becoming obsessed with dying, but about truly grasping the temporary nature of this human birth in order to live more fully. When we really understand, not just intellectually, but in our hearts, that this body will someday stop working, every healthy day becomes a gift. Every sensation becomes precious. Every breath becomes a miracle we're witnessing. Our culture's obsession with youth and physical perfection creates tremendous suffering around bodily impermanence. We spend billions of dollars trying to freeze frame our appearance at some idealized age, as if we could somehow opt out of the fundamental law of change. But what if we redirected that energy toward appreciating our bodies as they are right now, in this moment? There's a beautiful practice of body gratitude that works with impermanence rather than against it. Instead of looking in the mirror and cataloging what's wrong or what's changed, we can practice appreciating what's working. These eyes that see sunsets, these hands that can touch and create, these legs that carry us through our day saw temporary gifts that we get to experience during our brief time in these particular bodies. Working with vanity and appearance anxiety through impermanence wisdom doesn't mean not caring about how we look or abandoning reasonable self-care. Instead, it means holding our appearance lightly enough that our self-worth doesn't rise and fall with every wrinkle or weight fluctuation. When we understand that all bodies age and change, we can focus our energy on caring for our health rather than desperately trying to stop time. The practice becomes particularly poignant when we consider the bodies of those we love. Watching parents age, seeing friends face health challenges, or caring for ill family members can be profound teachers of impermanence. These experiences invite us to love bodies our own and others not, despite their fragility, but because of it. Let's pause for a body impermanence practice. Take a moment to scan through your body with gentle awareness, starting from the top of your head and moving down to your toes. As you notice each part, silently offer gratitude. Thank you, eyes, for seeing. Thank you, heart, for beating. Thank you, legs, for carrying me. Now bring to mind the reality that this body has changed continuously throughout your life and will continue changing until it eventually stops working entirely. Notice any feelings that arise, perhaps sadness, perhaps tenderness, perhaps a deeper appreciation. Finally, rest in awareness of the miracle that you get to have this temporary experience of being embodied, of sensing and moving and living in this physical form. There's an important distinction here between acceptance and resignation. Accepting bodily impermanence doesn't mean giving up on health, exercise, medical care, or reasonable efforts to maintain vitality. Instead, it means engaging in these activities from a place of care and gratitude rather than desperate attachment to maintaining some impossible permanent state. Many people discover that when they stop fighting against bodily impermanence, they actually become healthier. They're more likely to exercise for joy and strength rather than from fear and vanity. They're more likely to eat nourishing foods because they appreciate their bodies rather than punishing them. They're more likely to rest when they need rest and seek medical care when appropriate because they're caring for something precious rather than trying to control something they ultimately cannot control. The deeper teaching of bodily impermanence points towards something profound, the recognition that while our bodies are temporary, the awareness that experiences these bodies touches something beyond time and change. This doesn't require belief in any particular philosophy about what happens after death. It simply invites recognition that the consciousness reading these words right now has remained consistently present throughout all the changes your body has undergone since childhood. This perspective can bring tremendous peace to aging and health challenges. We can care for and appreciate our bodies while recognizing that our essential nature isn't limited to these physical forms. We can work skillfully with illness while understanding that our deepest identity remains untouched by bodily changes. We can age gracefully by accepting the body's natural evolution while resting in the awareness that observes all transformations. Here's where the teaching on impermanence transforms from philosophical understanding into lived spiritual practice. Instead of seeing uncertainty and change as problems to solve or obstacles to overcome, we can learn to meet them as doorways into deeper presence and wisdom. This shift from fighting against the unknown to finding curiosity within it might be one of the most liberating transformations possible in our anxiety-prone modern world. The Buddhist concept of don't know mind offers a radically different relationship with uncertainty than our culture typically promotes. While we're usually taught that not knowing is a problem requiring immediate solution, Buddhist wisdom suggests that don't know mind is actually a state of openness and possibility. When we don't know what will happen next, we're forced to be present with what's happening now. When we can't predict outcomes, we're invited to engage wholeheartedly with the process. I learned about this during a period when everything in my life felt uncertain. My career was in transition, my living situation was temporary, and I was navigating a health issue with no clear prognosis. Instead of my usual strategy of trying to figure everything out through mental analysis, I decided to experiment with resting and not knowing. What I discovered surprised me. There was actually a kind of relief in admitting that I didn't know what would happen next. It freed me from the exhausting task of trying to control the uncontrollable and allowed me to focus my energy on responding skillfully to whatever was actually occurring. This connects to what Zen tradition calls beginner's mind, approaching each situation with fresh eyes rather than through the filter of our assumptions and expectations. When we can meet change with beginner's mind, transitions become adventures rather than threats. New possibilities can emerge that our planning minds never would have considered. Think about the difference between approaching a major life change with anxiety versus curiosity. Anxiety asks, what if things go wrong? What if I can't handle it? What if I make the wrong choice? Curiosity asks, what might be possible here? What can this situation teach me? How might I grow through this experience? Both attitudes acknowledge uncertainty, but they create completely different internal experiences and often lead to very different outcomes. The paradox of finding stability within change reveals one of the deepest truths about human resilience. When we stop trying to create security through controlling external circumstances, which is ultimately impossible, we can discover an inner stability that travels with us through all conditions. This isn't the false security of denial or the brittle confidence of perfectionism, but the genuine confidence that comes from knowing you can adapt to whatever arises. Working with life transitions through a Buddhist lens transforms these inevitable passages from sources of stress into opportunities for spiritual development. Whether it's changing jobs, moving homes, ending relationships, or facing health challenges, each transition offers a chance to practice letting go of the old while remaining open to the new. The transition itself becomes the teacher, not just the obstacle to get through as quickly as possible. There's a beautiful practice I learned from Tibetan Buddhism called groundlessness meditation. Instead of trying to find solid ground to stand on, which is ultimately illusory, anyway, you practice resting in the open space of not knowing. You breathe with uncertainty, relax into groundlessness, and discover that you don't actually need solid ground to be okay. This practice is profoundly relevant to our times of rapid social, technological, and environmental change. Our relationship with technology and social change offers a perfect laboratory for practicing with impermanence. The pace of technological advancement means that skills, platforms, and entire industries become obsolete faster than ever before. We can approach this acceleration with anxiety about keeping up, or we can see it as ongoing practice in adapting and learning. The choice shapes our entire experience of living in rapidly changing times. Consider how differently we might engage with social media if we truly understood it's impermanent. Platforms rise and fall. Viral content is forgotten within days, and online controversies that seem monumentally important fade quickly from collective memory. When we hold these digital experiences lightly, we can engage with them more skillfully, participating when it serves our values, while not being devastated when algorithms change or platforms disappear. The impermanence of thoughts and emotions deserves special attention because it's both the most obvious and most forgotten aspect of our mental experience. Emotions arise and pass away constantly, yet we often act as if our current emotional state is permanent. Thoughts stream through awareness like clouds across the sky, yet we frequently get trapped in particular thought patterns as if they define reality. Let's try a practice with mental impermanence right now. For the next minute, simply observe your thoughts and emotions without trying to change them. Notice how they arise, exist for a period, and then naturally dissolve to be replaced by other thoughts and feelings. Even strong emotions, when observed mindfully, reveal their temporary nature. This awareness becomes a source of tremendous freedom when you know that this anxious thought, this sad mood, this excited anticipation will naturally pass. You don't need to fight against it or cling to it. You can simply let it be while it's here and let it go when it moves on. Creating what I call stability practices within change becomes essential for navigating uncertain times skillfully. These aren't activities that create permanent security, but practices that connect us to sources of grounding that remain available regardless of external circumstances. This might be a daily meditation practice, regular time in nature, consistent connection with loved ones, or engagement with meaningful work or service. The key is understanding that these practices don't provide stability by stopping change, but by connecting us to aspects of experience that remain constant within change, like the awareness that observes all transformations, or the basic human capacities for kindness, courage, and wisdom that can be accessed in any circumstance. One of the most profound shifts in working with uncertainty is recognizing that the fundamental nature of awareness itself, the consciousness that's reading these words right now, remains unchanged throughout all the transformations of body, mind, and circumstances. This isn't a philosophical concept, but something you can observe directly. The awareness that was present when you were 5 years old is the same awareness present now, despite all the changes you've undergone. Recognizing this unchanging element within change provides a kind of ultimate security that doesn't depend on any external condition. Working with uncertainty as spiritual practice also means learning to distinguish between appropriate and inappropriate worry. Appropriate concern motivates skillful action, saving money for emergencies, maintaining health, nurturing relationships. Inappropriate worry spins endlessly about imaginary future scenarios over which we have no control. Impermanence practice helps us focus our energy on what we can actually influence while accepting what lies beyond our control. The environmental and social uncertainties of our time offer particularly powerful opportunities for practicing with collective impermanence. Climate change, political upheaval, economic instability. These global challenges invite us to practice holding both activism and acceptance. engaging wholeheartedly with positive change while accepting that we can't control outcomes. This isn't passive resignation, but wise engagement that recognizes our interdependence with larger patterns of change. As we begin to integrate this understanding of impermanence as spiritual practice, we discover that uncertainty itself becomes a teacher. Instead of waiting for life to become predictable and secure, which it never will, we learn to find peace within the fundamental uncertainty that has always characterized human existence. This doesn't make us passive, but actually frees us to engage more courageously with life, knowing that our well-being doesn't depend on any particular outcome. Now, let's bring this profound teaching down to earth and explore how to integrate impermanence wisdom into the texture of ordinary life. Because while understanding impermanence intellectually is valuable, the real transformation happens when these insights become lived practices that shape how we navigate everything from morning coffee to difficult conversations to major life decisions. One of the most accessible ways to practice with impermanence is through what I call moment-to-moment impermanence awareness. This simply means occasionally tuning into the fact that this exact combination of circumstances, your current thoughts, the light in the room, the sounds around you, your body sensations will never occur again in exactly this way. Right now, as you're listening to these words, you're experiencing a completely unique moment that's already passing into memory. This awareness can transform mundane activities into opportunities for presence. That morning cup of coffee becomes a fleeting experience to savor rather than just fuel for the day. The conversation with your child becomes a precious interaction that's part of their limited childhood rather than just another task to get through. The walk to work becomes a journey through a world that's constantly changing rather than just transportation between destinations. Let's explore how impermanence perspective changes decision-making. Traditional decision-making often gets trapped in trying to predict and control future outcomes. If I choose this job, will it lead to the career I want in 10 years? Impermanence-informed decision-making asks different questions. Which choice allows me to engage most authentically with the present situation? Which option helps me grow and contribute now, regardless of where it might lead? This doesn't mean being impulsive or ignoring practical considerations. Instead, it means making decisions from wisdom about the uncertain nature of the future rather than from the illusion that we can guarantee specific outcomes. When we truly understand that all futures are unknown, we're free to choose based on our current values and understanding rather than trying to engineer particular results. I know a couple who approached buying a house through this lens. Instead of agonizing over whether it was the perfect forever home, which doesn't exist anyway, they asked whether it would serve their current needs and allow them to live according to their values now. They bought a modest home they could afford comfortably, knowing they might outgrow it or circumstances might change. 5 years later, when job opportunities led them to a different city, they moved without the devastation that often accompanies major changes to plans. Working with difficult emotions through impermanence lens offers immediate practical relief. When you're overwhelmed by anxiety, sadness, anger, or any challenging emotional state, remembering "this too shall pass" provides perspective without minimizing your experience. You don't have to like the emotion or pretend it's not real, but you can remind yourself that emotional states are temporary weather patterns in the sky of awareness. This is different from suppressing emotions. Instead of pushing difficult feelings away, you acknowledge them while also recognizing their temporary nature. I'm feeling really anxious right now, and this anxiety will change and eventually pass. This creates space around the emotion rather than being consumed by it. The practice becomes particularly powerful during intense emotional storms. In moments of grief, rage, or despair, when it feels like the current emotional state is the only reality that exists, impermanence awareness offers a lifeline, not by diminishing the intensity of the experience, but by providing perspective on its temporary nature. Creating meaningful rituals around endings and transitions helps integrate impermanence wisdom into life's natural cycles. Our culture often rushes through endings, leaving jobs, ending relationships, children leaving home without acknowledging their significance. But conscious ending rituals honor the impermanent nature of all phases of life. This might mean taking time to appreciate a home before moving, consciously celebrating the completion of a project before moving to the next one, or creating small ceremonies to mark the end of significant relationships or life phases. These rituals don't try to prevent change, but help us process it more consciously and completely. Building resilience for children through impermanence education might be one of the greatest gifts we can offer the next generation. Rather than trying to protect children from all change and uncertainty, which is impossible, anyway, we can help them develop comfort with the natural rhythms of transformation. This might mean explaining when pets die that death is a natural part of life, helping them understand that feeling sad when friends move away is normal because relationships change, or modeling how to adapt gracefully when plans change. Environmental consciousness naturally emerges from impermanence awareness. When we truly understand that our individual lives and even human civilization are temporary phenomena in Earth's history, we develop both humility and responsibility about our environmental impact. We can work to protect the environment, not from a desperate need to make everything permanent, but from appreciation for our temporary stewardship of this planet. The ethics of impermanence reveal profound implications for how we treat others and engage with our communities. If everyone you encounter is having a temporary human experience dealing with their own struggles, losses, and changes, this naturally evokes compassion and patience. Road rage becomes more difficult when you remember that the driver who cut you off is someone's loved one dealing with their own temporary existence full of challenges. Let's try some practical integration exercises you can begin using today. First, choose one routine daily activity, perhaps eating lunch, commuting, or getting ready for Buddhism for 1 week. Practice approaching it with impermanence awareness. Notice the unique qualities of each instance of this activity. Your Tuesday lunch is different from Monday's. Your morning commute occurs in a slightly different world than yesterday's. Second, experiment with ending rituals for smaller completions. When you finish reading a book, take a moment to appreciate the journey you've taken with it. When you complete a work project, pause to acknowledge both the effort you put in and the fact that it's now complete. When a visitor leaves your home, take a breath to appreciate the time you shared together. Third, practice the precious temporary moment exercise randomly throughout your day. Occasionally pause and notice. This moment with these particular thoughts, sensations, circumstances, unique, and will never occur again. Can you appreciate its temporary preciousness? For relationship integration, try approaching one challenging relationship with impermanence perspective. Instead of focusing on how this person always behaves in ways that irritate you, remind yourself that both of you are constantly changing. The person you're frustrated with today is not exactly the same person they were yesterday and won't be exactly the same person tomorrow. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it can create space for seeing people as dynamic rather than fixed. Time management transforms when viewed through impermanence lens. Instead of trying to fill every moment with productivity or struggling to make time last longer, you can focus on bringing quality attention to whatever you're doing. Whether you have 5 minutes or 5 hours for a task, approaching it with full presence makes the time more satisfying and often more effective. For self-care integration, regularly ask yourself, if I knew this body, this mind, these circumstances were temporary gifts, which they are, how would I care for them today? This often leads to kinder choices about rest, nutrition, exercise, and stress management, motivated by appreciation rather than fear. The goal isn't to become obsessed with impermanence or to think about endings constantly. Instead, it's to let this understanding flavor your approach to life, creating more presence, more appreciation, more flexibility, and more courage to engage fully with whatever is arising, knowing that it too shall pass. This transforms impermanence from a source of anxiety into a teacher of wisdom, guiding us toward what truly matters in our brief and precious time here. As we come to the end of our exploration of impermanence, I invite you to take a moment and notice how your understanding might have shifted during our time together. We've journeyed from the initial resistance most of us feel toward change, through the Buddha's profound insights about the temporary nature of all existence, to practical ways of embracing impermanence as a source of wisdom and freedom rather than anxiety and despair. We've seen how this ancient teaching applies to every aspect of modern life, our relationships and inevitable losses, our careers and material circumstances, our aging bodies and health challenges, and our daily navigation of uncertainty and change. Throughout this exploration, one truth has emerged again and again. When we align ourselves with the reality of impermanence rather than fighting against it, we discover a kind of peace and resilience that doesn't depend on external circumstances remaining stable. The journey from resistance to acceptance of change isn't a one-time shift, but an ongoing practice. There will still be mornings when you wake up wanting everything to stay exactly as it is. There will still be moments when loss feels unbearable or uncertainty triggers anxiety. The difference is that now you have a framework for understanding these experiences as natural human responses to our temporary existence, rather than evidence that something has gone wrong. What I find most beautiful about impermanence wisdom is how it simultaneously humbles us and empowers us. It humbles us by revealing the limits of our control. We cannot stop aging, prevent all loss, or guarantee any particular future. Yet it empowers us by showing that our well-being doesn't actually depend on controlling these uncontrollable things. We can find profound peace within uncertainty, deep appreciation within temporary experiences, and genuine security within the fundamental insecurity of existence. The freedom that comes from aligning with reality rather than fighting it is perhaps the most practical gift of impermanence practice. When you stop wasting energy trying to make the temporary permanent, you have so much more energy available for actually living. When you stop being surprised by change, you can adapt more gracefully. When you stop taking the good times for granted because you know they won't last forever, you can enjoy them more completely. This understanding naturally enhances appreciation and presence. The sunset is more beautiful because it's brief. The conversation with your aging parent is more precious because your time together is limited. The ordinary Tuesday evening with your family becomes special when viewed through the lens of its unrepeatable uniqueness. Impermanence doesn't diminish the value of our experience, it reveals their true preciousness. There's an important distinction between intellectual understanding and embodied wisdom that we've touched on throughout our exploration. You can understand impermanence, conceptually know that everything changes, that nothing lasts forever, while still being caught off guard by change when it arrives in your life. The deeper practice is allowing this understanding to move from your head to your heart, from concept to lived experience. This embodied wisdom comes through practice, through repeatedly choosing to meet change with curiosity rather than resistance, through consciously appreciating temporary experiences while you have them, through finding the unchanging awareness within all the changing circumstances of life. It's not something you achieve once and then possess permanently. It's a capacity you develop through ongoing practice. As you leave today's exploration, I encourage you to choose just one area where you'll practice applying impermanence wisdom this week. Perhaps it's approaching a current challenge with more acceptance of uncertainty. Maybe it's appreciating something precious in your life more fully because you recognize its temporary nature. Or it could be simply pausing occasionally to notice the constantly changing flow of thoughts, emotions, and sensations that make up your experience. In our next episode, we'll explore non-attachment in relationships, a teaching that builds beautifully on impermanence wisdom by showing how we can love deeply while holding lightly, how we can care profoundly without clinging desperately. These complementary teachings offer a complete approach to navigating the human experience with wisdom and grace. Before we part, let's rest together for a moment in the truth of this impermanent moment. Notice your breath naturally flowing in and out, each breath unique, arising and passing away. Feel your body sitting or moving, composed of elements that are constantly changing, never quite the same from moment to moment. Observe any thoughts or emotions present appearing and dissolving in the vast space of awareness. Rest in the recognition that you are simultaneously completely temporary. This particular combination of body, mind, and circumstances that makes up your current identity will eventually dissolve and utterly timeless, and that the awareness witnessing these words partakes of something beyond time and change. The Buddha's final words, according to tradition, were, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence." This beautiful paradox captures the essence of impermanence. Wisdom, everything is temporary, so engage wholeheartedly with your temporary existence. Love fully knowing loss is inevitable. Create meaningfully knowing nothing lasts forever. Care deeply while holding lightly. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of one of Buddhism's most transformative teachings. May your understanding of impermanence become a source of freedom rather than fear, presence rather than anxiety, appreciation rather than taking things for granted. May you find the courage to surf the waves of change rather than being tumbled by them. And may you discover that the peace you seek is available not despite life's constant transformations, but within them. Until we meet again, may you be well. May you embrace change with wisdom. And may you find the extraordinary within the ordinary flow of this temporary, precious existence we're all sharing together.